Hello everyone, welcome back to my SFL genre-based approach playlist. In this video, we are going to discuss the analytical exposition, which is a family of argumentative genres based on the genre-based approach. In the last video, we discussed the approach. We also discussed the teaching learning cycle, which is the genre-based pedagogy, which is heavily dependent on the systemic functional linguistics itself. And in this video, as I told you, we will have a brief discussion about analytical exposition text, the social purpose, the schematic structure, and linguistic features. And as usual, let's take a look at the outline to see what we are going to cover in this video. The first one, we will have an overview of the argumentative genres, and then we will discuss the analytical exposition genre. We will focus on the social purpose or the function of this genre, and then the schematic structure and the linguistic features. And the linguistic features of all genres in this approach are based on the systemic functional linguistics. So we will use some meta languages related to analytical exposition text. So if you are not familiar yet with systemic functional linguistics, I strongly recommend you to see another playlist, systemic functional linguistics playlist in this channel. And also at the end of this video, we will have an example of analytical exposition where I have marked all the linguistic features in a separate file, okay? So because there are quite a lot of topic to cover in this video, so let's begin. We begin by overviewing the argumentative genres. But we need to remind ourselves about what the genre is. And if you want to refresh your memory about genre, maybe you want to see the previous video. But I think this should be enough, what I have written here. So a genre is a socially recognized, staged, goal-oriented social process. So genre or text is a social entity, and it is socially recognized, which means that all members of the society know or recognize the patterns of the genre. For example, when we look at the story, the text, a written story, for example, we recognize that it is a story. We also recognize procedure or instruction, and so on and so forth. Okay, and a genre is staged, which means that there are particular structure in genres that we need to create, and by those stages we can recognize a genre. And then it is also goal oriented, which means that we use language to achieve a particular social purpose, And over time, the way we use language to achieve those purposes create what we call genres. And also it is a social process because a genre or genres, all genres live in society, okay? And if that is what genre is, and then argumentative genres are socially recognized stage social processes in which mounting arguments to persuade is the goal. So, we derive this definition from the first definition, but we add the social process, the social purpose, of these genres, okay? That is to mount arguments, to persuade. So we have another term for argumentative genres like persuasive texts, okay? And then argumentative genres are part of academic genres. This means that in academic settings, in schools and universities, students are often required to write or read argumentative texts. So that's why argumentative genres are part of their schooling, their learning activities, especially in writing courses. Okay, and then argumentative genres have typical characteristics. They contain particular positions, claims, and arguments to support those claims, and sometimes refute the claims and arguments of other positions, and sometimes end with a recommendation. This means that an argumentative text has a position because the writer writes that text to propose his or her position, claims, or point of view regarding a topic or an issue, and then he or she will need to mount the arguments to support their claims. And sometimes, which means that not always, an argumentative text refutes the claims and arguments of other positions, or what we know as counter arguments. Okay, and sometimes, again, which means not always, an argumentative text can end with a recommendation of for anything, like for an action or an understanding, decision making, and so on and so forth. And when we talk about argumentative genres, we talk about expositions, critical response or challenge, and discussion texts. Okay, so expositions are one-sided argumentative genre. This means that when someone writes an exposition, he is not required to debate or to counter the arguments of opposition. Okay, that's why it is called one-sided argumentative genre. What they need to do is to provide their arguments to support their claims or positions. Okay? But critical response or challenge, as the name suggests, it is two-sided argumentative genre because it is a challenge. So someone can challenge a particular position or claim by writing an argumentative genre. So in writing that text, the writer will need to review the opposing arguments and then review those arguments by providing alternative arguments or claims, stronger claims, more evidence, and so on and so forth. And the last one is discussion, which is a multiple-sided argumentative genre, which means that the writer discusses different points of view, different claims, different arguments, and then look at which one is the strongest position or claim among the arguments or claims. Okay. And because analytical exposition is an exposition, we need to see the difference between two types of expositions. The first one is the analytical exposition that we are discussing right now, and the second one is the hortatory exposition. The difference between these two types of exposition is that analytical exposition is written to persuade that something is or is not the case. Meanwhile, the hortatory exposition is written to persuade to do something, to persuade the readers to take a course of action. So that is the difference. But in terms of the schematic structure and linguistic features, they are similar. Okay. And now we come to the analytical exposition. As I told you before, that an analytical exposition is a family of argumentative genres that aims to propose a position, point of view, or claim regarding whether something is or is not the case, and support the position with one-sided sound arguments. I emphasize the one-sided sound arguments here to remind you that analytical exposition or exposition in general are unlike the critical response, challenge, or the discussion, which involve more than one position. Okay, so analytical exposition is just aimed at mounting arguments, one-sided arguments, to support one's claims. Okay. By looking at the definition, we can also derive the social purpose, that is, to persuade the audience. So analytical exposition is not limited or not confined to the written genre, but also spoken genre or spoken language. Okay, so the purpose is to persuade the audience, whether it is listener or reader, that something is or is not the case. So the writer is arguing about a case, whether something is or is not the case. Okay, to clarify this, we can take a look at the sample titles of analytical exposition text here. Is it ethical to use AI to write the entire essay? This is an example of analytical exposition text. Why? Because from this title, we can predict, or we can even infer the purpose of this genre, that is to argue that whether using AI to write the entire essay is ethical. Okay, so it is about whether something is or is not the case. It's just like the second one, banning Gen AI tools in the classroom may be unwise, or are Gen AI tools really useful as feedback providers, or do AI detectors work? Okay, so we can see the difference between hortatory expositions, although I don't put those titles here. But for example, should we ban Gen AI tools in the classroom? Okay, if that is the title, and the title is hortatory exposition, because should we ban Gen AI tools in the classroom? It means that the writer is persuading the readers to embrace the Gen AI tools in the classroom, or to ban them in the classroom. Okay, so here these are some titles of analytical exposition text, and I told you that at the end of this video we will have a closer look at an analytical exposition example, and that is entitled "Are Gen AI tools really useful as feedback providers?" So we will use this title to look at the linguistic features and the schematic structures of an analytical exposition text at the end of this video. Alright, and now we come to the schematic structure. Okay. Like a hortatory exposition text, an analytical exposition text has three main stages. Okay. The first one is the thesis. Okay, the thesis part is the very first part of the text, and then a series of arguments, and the reiteration of the thesis or reinforcement. In another writing approach, that's the process-based writing approach, an argumentative essay is divided also in three stages: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Okay? But the problems with this labeling is that the label of each stage is not descriptive enough. So we don't know what a stage does. We don't know the function of each stage, okay? But in genre-based approach, the stages are labeled descriptively. For example, a thesis emphasizes the part where the writer introduces the topics, build the common ground, highlight the issue, and so on and so forth. So the main of the thesis is to build a context, okay, for the reader to understand, and then propose the thesis statement or the main claim. Okay. So the first one, the writer introduces the topic, so the reader knows what the text is about, and then he also builds the common grounds with the reader. So the writer begins with non-controversial aspect of an issue, okay, of the topic, something that all people agree on, okay. And then the writer highlights the issue in the topic that is being targeted in the text. So the writer highlights the issue to show that although we have a common ground topic, there is an issue that needs to be targeted in the text, okay. And the writer can also review existing claims of the issue, but this is optional because analytical exposition is a one-sided argumentative genre, okay. But reviewing an existing claims means that the writer is aware that not all readers hold the same claim, position, or point of view towards the object or the topic he is writing. Okay? And then he proposes the thesis statement, and he can also preview the arguments, but I write here that the previews is an optional element because it can also be embedded in the thesis statement, as we will see in the example. Okay. So this is the first stage, or this is how a writer begins his or her analytical exposition text. And then the second stage is a series of arguments. This is the stage where the writer makes claims to support the thesis statement. Okay? And then he mounts one-sided arguments to support the claims. So we can see that the claims should be or must be linked to the thesis statement, okay? And while the arguments must support the claims, okay? And supports the arguments with evidence. So evidence support the arguments. So the writer needs to make the claim. The claim in an argumentative essay or analytical exposition is usually the topical sentence of a paragraph, the first sentence of each paragraph in the body of the text, okay? But arguments needs to be sound, and a sound argument sound arguments are arguments which are backed up with evidence, but the evidence needs to be linked to the arguments by reasoning. So for example, when a writer provides an arguments and then evidence, he needs to create a link. He needs to tell why the evidence supports, why or how the evidence supports the arguments, okay? And if in the thesis stage the writer also review the existing claims, then he also needs to refute those claims, okay? So that's why this is an optional stage, that is presenting refutation to counter arguments. And at the end of the text, the writer needs to summarize the main claims and then reiterates the thesis statement. So the thesis statement, which is written in the very beginning of the text, will be reinforced or reiterated the in the last stage, but in a more confident manner, because the writer has provided the arguments to support uh, the thesis statement and the claims. Okay, and now the linguistic features. As you already know, that the linguistic features of genres in systemic functional linguistic genre-based approach are described in terms of systemic functional linguistic register variables. Okay, the field that is related to the topic, the tenor related to the social relationship between the, for example, the writer and the reader, and then the mode, whether it is spoken or written language, whether it is a face-to-face interaction or distant interaction, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we will use meta language related to the field, tenor, and mode to discuss the linguistic features of analytical exposition, and we will look at each stage and phase in the text. Okay, we begin with this one by looking at the function of the thesis. The thesis is the stage. Okay, the thesis is the stage, functions to introduce the topic, to build common ground or context, and to propose thesis statement. These three functions are uh, the default function of an analytical exposition, so they are required, they are obligatory phases in the thesis stage. And if you remember our discussion uh, related to the register, we know that register refers to the variability of language, and in context. Okay, and we also know that register resonates or associates with the meta function. Okay? So yeah, so we will need to look at the register and also the meta function, especially the related systemic functional grammar. You still remember, like the transitivity system, the modality system, and the appraisal system, and so on and so forth. Okay. In the thesis stage, in terms of the field, an analytical exposition writer typically uses the technical terms and relational attributive, identifying, and mental processes, as well as circumstances. Okay, these are terms in the transitivity system. Okay, the technical terms are related to the field or the topic, and relational attributive, identifying, and identifying process are associated with how we attribute an entity or participant, or how we identify the participant. Okay, by saying that X is useful, X is effective, we are attributing the participant X with the attribute useful and effective. Okay, or we can also identify participants by by using relevant processes, okay, or verbs like feedback provision is what makes a student's writing develops. For example, it means that we identify the feedback provision as something useful or beneficial for students' writing development. Okay, so if you pay attention to the processes or the verbs used in the relational, attributive, and identifying processes, you will be aware that those processes really about whether something is or is not the case. So that's why these two processes are very prominent in the analytical exposition text. Okay, but in the thesis statement, the writer can also use or include mental processes. Mental processes are verbs that express the mental experiences, like thinking or feeling, okay, including perceiving. So, for instance, a thesis statement sounds like I think feedback provision is blah blah blah. There we can see that the writer uh, uses the mental process, I think, the think. Okay. Why this is important? Because analytical exposition and the argumentative genres in general, they are opinions. They contain opinions, objective opinions. Okay, so that's why mental processes are also prominent in this genre, and also circumstances. So circumstances like in the classroom, at the end of semester, and so on and so forth. Circumstances are the environment in which the processes take place. So it can be circumstance of time, place, reason, and so on and so forth. Okay, and the field-related linguistic features are mainly useful for clarity, okay, especially the technical terms and circumstances. The technical terms can clarify the topic being advanced in the text, and the circumstances clarify the context. Okay? And then the tenor. Okay, and you need to remind yourself that we are still talking about the linguistic features of the thesis stage. Okay. If you still remember, tenor relates to how the writer engages and or interacts with the reader. So in doing so, the writer will use a lot of statements because he needs to make claims, and claims are statements. Okay, they are statements. They are declaratives. Okay, and statement is one of the speech function. If you still remember the mood system, okay. So this is the type of interaction statements by which the writer gives information to the reader. Okay? And also questions, but questions here should be understood like a hypothetical questions that do not need answers but are used as hooks, okay, to grab the reader's attention. And also modality, if you still remember, in the modality system, modality shows the writer's stance or positions or opinions, okay, and also evaluative language, which we have discussed in the appraisal system. Okay, appraisal system, uh, which is developed by Martin and White. And the tenor related linguistic features are used are used by the writers to ensure the persuasiveness of the text of his claims and arguments, especially the thesis statement, okay, because we are still discussing the thesis stage. And the last one is we can also look at the mode. The mode includes the use of appropriate language style, okay, like a written or spoken style. We should know the difference. According to Holiday, written text is lexically denser than the spoken text, and while the spoken text is more grammatically complex than the written text. So that is the difference in terms of style between the written and spoken language. And also the use of transition signals, like to link existing claims and the current claims or thesis statement. Okay, and we will look at the examples. And what we can conclude here is that the mode related linguistic features are used to create and maintain the coherence in the text. In the second stage, most of the linguistic features are still the same, like the writer still use the technical terms, relational processes, and also the text connectives, transition signals, and so on. And because I had discussed in the previous slide, so I don't want to repeat them in this slide and then in the next slide. But what I need to tell you that the series arguments functions to mount claims that link back to the thesis statement and some arguments to support each claim. Okay, so to achieve this purpose, the writer needs to use verbal processes. Okay, verbal processes to, for example, to say what expert said. Why verbal processes like expert says that, or scholars reported that, or Holiday argues that they are all verbal processes or saying verbs. Why they are important? The reason is because sound arguments need evidence, need data, okay? Need something to back up, okay, to support the arguments, okay? And usually we cite experts, we use statistics, okay, as the evidence. And by doing so, we also use attribution. If you still remember attribution, we talk about attribution in the appraisal system, uh, by which the writer engage with other writers in his text. Okay? For example, he attributes ideas, opinions, or statements to uh, an authoritative external source, like journal article or a book written by experts in the field. Okay, like name and year, for example, yeah, or by using what we call circumstance of angle, like according to, and so on and so forth. Okay, but attributing external sources is often not enough if we do not endorse the sources. Okay, endorsement, which is still in the appraisal system, functions to show how the references support the claims and arguments. For example, the writer can use expressions like this implies that, or this shows that, or this means that, okay? Or by looking at the evidence, we can infer that, and so on and so forth, okay? And modality, a modality like, the use of modal verbs or modal adjuncts like can or should or must or will. They have different degrees in terms of value. Please return to the modality system video in this channel and you will find. And then the evaluative language like appreciation, yeah, positive appreciation toward the things or judgments of people. Okay, I think they are all functions to configure the persuasiveness of the text. Okay, and the mode here related to how the language is used to create and maintain the organization of the text coherently. And it is very important for the writer to separate claims and arguments into separate paragraphs. For example, if in the preview he mentions three main claims that he will advance in this stage, the series of arguments stage, then there must be at least 3 paragraphs, because one paragraph will be dedicated to elaborate the claims and the arguments. In general, when we talk about paragraph, we know that a body of paragraph consists of one topical sentence, which is the claim, and supporting details, which are the arguments, and then the concluding sentence, if the paragraph is long enough, and then the writer needs to add a concluding sentence at the end of the paragraph, like the very last sentence in the paragraph, which is often started by therefore, yeah, that that is an example of connectives that link the arguments to the tentative conclusion. And then the use of thematic progression, especially the linear pattern or the zigzag pattern. If you still remember our discussion in the theme rim system, the linear thematic progression refers to the zigzag pattern, where what the writer is saying now is part of what he has said before. So by using the patterns, the writer ensures that all new information is sufficiently developed in the text as the text progresses. And the last one is the reiteration of the thesis, which functions to summarize the main claims or arguments and to reiterate the thesis statement. As you can see here, the linguistic features, the field-related linguistic features that I put here are just two. That is the use of technical terms and relational processes. Why? Because the technical terms maintain the consistency about the topic of the issue, and then the relational processes are still used to maintain the consistency of the thesis statement, because the thesis statement is written in or by using relational process like attributive or identifying process. Then it will need to be expressed in the same process in this last stage. Okay, but I am wrong if I say that other processes like behavioral process, existential process, material process are not used in this text. That is not the case. In fact, the writer can use as many processes as possible, but it will depend on what he is trying to say, the point that he is trying to make. Okay, and in terms of tenor, the use of statement remains, because thesis statement, whether it is the first stage or in the first stage or in this last stage, it remains a statement. Okay, the use of modality, for example, if the writer wants to propose a recommendation, and also evaluative language if necessary. And in terms of mode, the use of transition signals like in conclusion, which is what we often find in the very last paragraph of an argumentative essay. Okay, because yeah, in the last part, the last paragraph is where the writer concludes without introducing new claims or new arguments. Okay, so in conclusion is the most appropriate transition, okay, to use between the arguments and the conclusion or the reiteration stage. Okay, now we can summarize the linguistic features of analytical exposition. So if we don't have to look at each stage and just look at the overall text, and then we can say that the linguistic features of analytical exposition consist of the use of technical terms, relational processes, okay, verbal processes, mental processes, and then clear circumstances, okay, to define the context. And then in terms of tenor, because the writer needs to create and maintain the persuasiveness of his claims and arguments, he will use statements, questions, but questions as hooks to grab the reader's attention, and he will also use modality to express the stance of position, but the modality should be objective. If you remember our discussion in the modality system, we have objective and subjective modalities. We also have explicit and implicit modality, and so on and so forth. He will also use evaluative language to express his evaluation of things or people, like appreciation or judgment. Okay. He will use attribution to provide evidence and endorsements to link evidence and arguments. So these are all meta-language that we can use to talk about to describe linguistic features and schematic structures of an analytical exposition. Okay. And the last one is related to the mode by which the writer maintains the coherence of the text. If it is a written language, then the writer may need to pay attention to the writing mechanics, okay, and also use appropriate transition signals or text connectives to maintain the organization. Also, it is preferred that the writer use linear or zigzag thematic progression patterns, because if he doesn't use this one and use, for example, constant thematic progression patterns, then he will end up talking the same thing again and again, over and over, without giving a chance to the new information he says sufficiently developed. Okay, and now we will look at the example of analytical exposition. Okay, so this is the analytical exposition text example that I said. I have divided the text into stages. The first one, we have the thesis stage, and then a series of arguments. There are 3 arguments, and then at the end we have a reiteration or reinforcement. Okay, so I also have marked the linguistic features used in this text, but not all of them, because I just want to show you an example. I know that the video has become long enough. Okay. And for example, here we have the technical terms, yeah, like GNI, that is technical terms, which is directly relevant to the title, which is about the GNI tools. Okay, so the writer uses the correct or appropriate technical terms to clarify the topic, and also he uses a relational attributive process here, and general tools are truly effective, where he attributes the tools, the participants, with the attribute effective, and this one is also a relational process, which is a relational identifying process, okay, in which the writer identifies feedback providers uh, as an issue, okay. Also, we have a high deontic modality here. Still remember the deontic modality or the modulation is a modality about obligation or inclination, and this is an obligation, and must is a high obligation. We have another relational attributive process here, and we can take a look at the circumstance of place. The writer is trying to define the context here. Okay, and this is the example of generalized participants. The writer also includes existing claims here, and then the is the relational attributive process, and now we have the thesis statement and the preview. Okay, the preview of arguments. So the writer states the thesis. These texts argues that generators are useful as feedback providers, and then three claims are presented here as or previewed here. That is, because they offer timely guidance. First, support students' revision process. Second, and strengthen learning when combined with teacher direction. Good. So there are three arguments, three claims, I'm sorry, previewed here, and it is expected that there will be at least three paragraphs in the argument stage, and here they are. There are three, and each are dedicated to develop the claims. Okay. Okay. The writer also used transition here, and also still relational attributive process to state the claim. Okay. So the claim is in the first sentence of the paragraph or the topical sentence. That is the claim. The full claim is this. Okay. The full claim, and we can see that the claim is in the relational attributive process. Okay. Okay, we have another generalized participant here, several researchers, and then the writer uses a verbal process state here. Okay, and also the evidence, okay, attribution here, authors, other authors. It's just examples, okay, but this is how the writers engage with external sources to provide evidence to support his claim. Okay, and then also some technical terms here: grammatical, organizational, and lexical problems. These are all technical terms when we talk about writing. And then there is a verbal process here. Report is a verbal process, okay, followed by a mental process, find. Okay, another mental verb here, or I mean mental process here, recognize, and also an endorsement. This show that this is an endorsement. The writer endorses the external sources, okay, to show how the sources I'm tired, I'm sorry, how the sources support his claims or linking his claim. Okay, another relational attributive process here, and modality, another transition to begin the second argument paragraph, the claim, the full claim here. Okay, there's a medium epistemic modality here. I don't mark all, but they are similar. Okay, and another transition, relational attributive process, the full claim. So all the claims are expressed in the relational attributive process because this is an analytical exposition. Okay, and then we have another generalized participant followed by a verbal process argue here. Still the technical terms, another technical terms is used here, automated feedback, circumstance of condition to define the context. I don't mark the modality here, the deontic modality. Okay, and then another transition here, the last one, okay, which is the transition used to link the argument stages, and this stage, the last one, and then the reiterated thesis here, which is okay, which is consistent. Okay, GenAI tools are useful, and okay, GenAI tools are useful as feedback providers. Okay, so consistent, and those are expressed in also the same process. Okay, relational attributive process. And because there is a the writer provided or reviewed existing claim here, so he feels the need to add a refutation. Okay, this is the refutation or counter arguments. The last one, he adds a recommendation. The recommendation here sounds like or looks like a hortatory exposition because it calls for a course of action, but actually it doesn't necessarily transform this essay into hortatory exposition, because a type of exposition, whether it is an analytical exposition or hortatory exposition, is based on the thesis statement, the claims, and the reiterated thesis. All right, I think enough, and I will provide this example for you to download in the description of this video below. Thank you very much for watching patiently. Thank you very much for following my channels. If you have questions, corrections, please let me know. I'm not sure if I can explain other genres in the future, but I will try my best, hopefully. But that's all for tonight or today. See you again. Bye.